Perfect. All right, shall I start? So, folks, we're gonna begin as best that we can. This is the volume that you get outside. So, if you can hear, hopefully, if you're having any difficult hearing, please feel free to move closer into the direction of the microphones. We want to thank folks for coming, whether here or for folks who are watching online. It's a bit of a learning curve as for all these sorts of events over the past 18 months or so. So if you're online and there's any issues, please bear with us. Let us know in the comments, and we'll do our best to speak to fix things up. If our video or audio loops for those of you who are live here, that's not us. That's on your glasses manufacturer, and so hopefully they can help you out with this. We want to thank people who are here in person and who are watching for caring enough about these subjects, for making the time to be with us today. We're hoping that this is a first of perhaps other conversations around addressing issues of poverty and homelessness here in Regina. We want to thank folks who we've already met here who have come looking for other groups that are asking these same kind of questions. My name is Cameron Fraser. I'm minister here at Knox-Metropolitan. We're an affirming church of the United Church of Canada here in the heart of the city. I want to acknowledge that as we gather to speak about issues around home, around safety, that long before this church was here, that long before the city surrounding us was built, that the land we gather upon was already a sacred space. The land that we gather upon was already home before these buildings were here. This land has traditionally been Nehewak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota land. Since then, the homeland of the Métis Michif Nation, land we speak of as Treaty 4 territory. And also, being that I am standing as a member of the clergy of a church, I do want to acknowledge that the United Church of Canada was a participant, a fairly central participant in the residential school system and the 60s scoop. Issues that have long continuing effects and intermingled causes of some of the issues that we are speaking about on this day, around issues of poverty, homelessness, and all manners of precarity for individuals. We are all of us called to work in the light of these and other historic and ongoing injustices. So some of us who are here in person or watching online are members of this church as a faith community. Others are neighbors, concerned citizens, people who work around issues of poverty and homelessness in the city. This began with our church community asking questions about how to respond to issues of poverty and homelessness that we see literally on our front steps, the space that I am standing. These are complicated and challenging issues that tug at the core of our being as we witness suffering and inequality, and often don't know the right way to respond. We want to, as a church, and to invite others into this conversation with us, to ground whatever responses we might take as we move forward in a broader understanding of issues around poverty and homelessness, recognizing that what we see on this particular geographic corner is just one manifestation of inadequate supports for people who have been excluded and marginalized in many ways, people who, like any of us, long to be safe, long to be welcomed as members of our community, to offer who they are and to be seen as such. So this afternoon, we're joined by representatives from 3 groups who work with compassion and insight informed by the experiences of people living in poverty and grappling with homelessness. This evening or afternoon, I can never remember at what point we move from afternoon into evening. And depending on when you're watching it, that's a little bit arbitrary, isn't it? This afternoon, we will be hearing from the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry, the Downtown Regina Community Support Team, and Andrew Stevens, City Councillor, representing the Regina Plan to End Homelessness. We thought that for our format for this evening, each group would present one group at a time. And right after each group's presentation, if there's a question to clarify what that particular group does or something that they've just said, we'll do those questions right away so that you don't have to remember it. but broader questions around the broader issues that we're seeing, what is to be done, how community members can be involved. We'll save that till the end, at which point we'll bring all three groups back up so all three groups can engage in a bit of a dialogue with others here, and also recognizing that there are other agencies here who bring their levels of expertise as well. For folks watching online, we have people monitoring the comments to make sure that your questions are also a part of this time. So for folks who are here in person, we want to thank you for keeping masks on, for giving other people adequate space. Learning about these things is one thing, but ultimately I believe we're here because we want to understand what can be done. And that sounds overly simplistic, and there's groups who have been working on this for longer than my own lifetime, but seeking to figure out what actions can be taken to make some change in these areas. We want to learn what can be done and how people can collaborate, including collaborating with people experiencing homelessness to arrive at solutions that are right for people who are experiencing things. So folks within the Knox-Met congregation, we hope that you'll watch for more opportunities to engage with this as a particular community. And folks from other organizations and other communities, we're very interested in ongoing conversations and hoping that these sorts of things can continue. If you're from another agency or individuals working on these issues, and you're up for it, I'd love to chat with you about how we can be part of the same conversations together. Before we have our first group, I do want to ask the chair of the board of Knox-Met United Church to come in and offer a few comments.
Thanks, Cam. Hello, everybody. It's a wonderful thing to see you. I recognize some of you from the other side of the door, and others from the community. It's just it's gratifying to see so many people here, and to recognize there are many online. I just want to say, as the chair of the board, that sometimes people think that this church taking up political things is inappropriate. There are some people that make that statement, that it's not appropriate for churches to be involved in politics. And it seems to me that a person could only say that from a place of intense privilege. You would absolutely be a person of intense privilege if that's what you actually thought, that the church should not be involved in politics. The fact is, if a person says that church should not be involved in politics, that itself is a political statement. And so I'm very glad to say that we're working on this issue that has been ours for a number of years and has become more intense with the conditions that have been taking place. And we care about the people that are here, that are homeless, and the ones that are not here at this moment, but are in our city and that you are well aware of. So from the board, I just want to say thanks for being here, and thanks for your help in discerning a way forward that honors all people.
So the first group that we'd like to invite up is the Downtown Community Support Team. Here they come.
Okay, is this good? Okay, thanks for having us, everybody. My name is Alyssa Marinos, and I'm the supervisor of the new Downtown Regina Community Support Program.
My name's Alejandra Cabrera, and I'm also part of the community support team.
So I guess prior to any questions or discussion, further dialogue, I'll quickly just ramble through what our program is. We are a new initiative through the City of Regina and the Regina Downtown Business Improvement District. We are a pilot project right now. We're a 4-person outreach team, and we provide support and non-emergent crisis intervention to folks in the downtown through daily kind of engagement with the community. We support and engage with folks who are maybe dealing with mental health issues or addictions. We support folks who are potentially experiencing homelessness, a variety of other social and economic factors that place certain individuals at higher risk of harm. And we support them through street outreach. We operate Monday to Friday. Our hours shift with the seasons, but right now we're about 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And we respond to phone calls, or we just engage with folks just through daily foot circuits and being a presence in the community. And I guess speaking to the broader issue of homelessness and poverty, which is this discussion here, we have seen the firsthand impacts of the issues of homelessness right now in the city, which are only getting worse. We see folks who are not able to transition from the income assistance from SAP to SIS and the implications and ripple effects that is having. We see folks trying to find shelter anywhere they can. Now that the winter and the colder months are getting here, they're trying to seek refuge literally wherever they can, even right in the corners here, and the safety and the refuge of the church. But also just anywhere in the parks, anywhere that offers some safety and some form of shelter. And we have been trying to support these individuals, make those necessary connections that they need to, whether it's making appointments, getting them to appointments, figuring out that they need IDs, figuring out that they need to have this appointment and they need to make it to wherever. So we're trying our best to facilitate those connections. But it is very difficult, and navigating these systems, even with our support, seems to be a daily struggle as well. I don't know if Alejandra has anything to add.
So this issue has obviously always kind of been around, but I think it's been magnified more also because of COVID and some things that people aren't aware of who aren't experiencing homelessness. The restrictions have really limited things for people. So like shelter accessibility, there's a restriction in number of occupancies. So an example is Salvation Army had 24 beds available pre-COVID, and now it's down to 6. There's also operations, hours of operation and staffing. So lots of nonprofits, has limited staff, high turnover, because the demand is so high. And then also now with the proof of vaccination. So in order to get your proof of vaccination, you need to have ID, you need to have, 2 pieces of ID, and then also access to a computer and internet. And these are great barriers that some of the people that we're helping trying to access. And I think a good way of kind of imagining what these barriers are is we were talking about how, let's say you woke up one morning and you have nothing except for the clothes on your back. You don't have any ID and nothing of that. And you need to apply for assistance. You walk in, they have you go on a phone for 2 hours at least to wait to talk to someone. There's all the legal jargon that even someone like myself who has an education background has a hard time understanding. They tell you they need proof of identification. You have to be a resident from the province, but you can't get that proof of identification because you don't have the $15, you don't have a mailing address, and all your other stuff was stolen. But that's why you're applying for assistance, because you need money to get ID, to get housing. And so it's a vicious circle or a cycle that continues to just spiral, essentially. And then that's how we also see ourselves with a problem with alcohol and drug use as a way of numbing, because when you're constantly being turned down, it creates additional traumas as well. So it's not just one issue, it's a compound of many issues that people are facing. So
yeah, and maybe to piggyback again on Alejandra, is that doesn't take into consideration folks who are experiencing intergenerational trauma or just trauma in general. Chronic homelessness is trauma itself every day. And so to be able to try and pick yourself up and make this appointment and make sure you're not late and make sure you have your IDs, like it's when they're in fight or flight consistently every day, it's not as easy as just pick yourself up and get to this appointment and things will be fine. You know, and again, notwithstanding any issues of lack of access to employment. You know, a lot of folks who are experiencing homelessness, employment is hard to get. Nobody's willing to give folks a shot. If you have involvement with the criminal justice system, there's another huge barrier. If you are part of the 2S LGBTQ plus community, further barriers for shelter options for you, which are already limited. You know, and so trying to find a safe, accessible shelter if you identify as part of that community, that's just another barrier as well. And so there's a multitude of things at play. And I think what needs to happen is everybody needs to get on the same page. And we need to look at action more so than more conversation around it. Education is definitely key, and I think this is a great way to bring everybody into the conversation, and I think that's fantastic. It definitely needs to happen more consistently, but at the same time, more action needs to happen. Exactly like Alejandra said, this is a problem that we've known is here for a long time, and it's not going to go anywhere, and it's only really going to get worse, and I'm sure that Andrew may be able to speak with that about the plan to end homelessness a bit more. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything else. You can ask some questions. But
So the community support program will come back up when each group comes at the end for more dialogue and conversations, unless there were any clarifying questions about the work that they do. Seeing none, I think they offered a great segue by ending with famous words. Andrew can explain all that. So as to not put pressure unduly on Andrew, but we're very thankful that Andrew is willing to come on behalf of City Council. Andrew's been a person that we've reached out to lots, just asking as a dialogue partner to talk about trying to put what we're experiencing here in the church into a broader context, and to speak about some of the aspirations and hopes of the Regina plan to end homelessness and where community organizations like churches and others can be involved. So let's please welcome City Councillor Andrew Stevens.
Thanks a lot, Cam. I do want to acknowledge the work that Cam, the Knox-Met, does in this community. The anti-poverty work, the outreach is incredible. And I do appreciate that the dialogue that started because people were housed here at the front of Knox-Met didn't turn into what I'd often hear is a call to police and just to remove a problem. And I think that speaks volumes to what the parishioners here are committed to doing about this very serious issue in our community. I'd also like to acknowledge and express gratitude to community organizations and advocates, as well as city staff, who over the years have done a lot of work educating me, informing me about the existing policies, their shortfalls, what needs to happen, and also the lived realities. Instead of just talking about poverty and homelessness, what does it look like? What do we need to do about it? And what's the human face of that issue? And that's really important. So I don't want to be here representing City Council. I have some different positions on a variety of policies around this particular matter. So I'm here representing me. I think there's two things I'd really like to start with. One, there is nothing easier to solve in this city as a social problem than homelessness. If there was a political will, by the end of next week, I could find a house, a bedroom, a stable place for someone to live by Friday of next week. The vacancy problem that we saw during the boom is gone. Landlords are desperate for people to inhabit their vacant apartments, condos, and homes. Regina Housing Authority took us on a tour. I say us, the members of council and the mayor, a couple weeks ago. They don't know what to do with all their empty spaces. So wrap your head around that. There is so much space for people in this city that it's a problem. And that's the overproduction of certain commodities is a pretty inherent characteristic of late-stage capitalism. We'll save that conversation for later. This is not, there's no place for people to be. And we solve homelessness all of the time. When people are evacuating natural disasters, we find places for them on a temporary basis with the idea that there's supports around them. When we settle refugees, especially Syrian refugees as an example, we were successful in implementing a housing first strategy. It came with different names and it was for other reasons, but there was a political will and we solved it. Certainly there's other supports that are required. What is lacking is serious political commitment and the kind of support structure that's necessary to ensure that housing turns into a stable life. So if you're talking about why it is that people are homeless, that's the real problem. If it's addictions, if it's escape from domestic violence, if it's mental health or a combination of these factors, that's the real issue here. And I think it's important to recognize that because it has to be a conversation that stops us from just saying we need more affordable housing and social housing. No, we don't. There's already an abundance of it. It's the political will and the support structures that are required to identify the problem and to provide a long-term solution, right? So that's what's significant. The second thing is that this is a collective responsibility, and it's to our collective shame that a society as rich as our own, at the municipal level and provincial and federal, that we allow this to be sustained. The reason I say that is because there is often a conversation that erupts where this is not our responsibility. And you'll spend long council meetings and you'll spend long meetings at the working group that developed the plan to end homelessness, which I promise we'll talk about in a second, where it's always someone else's job. And you'd say, well, it's the province. The province does healthcare, does social assistance, it does detox. And they'll say, well, no, it's the federal government that has to give us money for housing. And at the provincial or at the municipal level, it's the same thing. So there's constantly a finger pointing of who's responsible for it. Well, someone has to be responsible for it. And that's why I think we need to go back, and whenever a politician tells you it's someone else's job, just say, you're full of shit. That is not the truth. It is a collective responsibility. Different levels of government hold different levels of accountability and responsibility, but we need to work on this together. The city doesn't provide health care as it did in the past. It doesn't provide social services as it did in the past, or like some American or other Canadian cities in Confederation. So do we have the resources to do it by ourselves? No, but it is our collective responsibility, and we already have policies in place at every level of government in some way or another to identify this problem and to work on solutions. So if there's going to be a long-term game plan here, it means collaboration that starts with the premise that Housing First is successful, it works, and that all three levels of government have to work in tandem to make this problem go away. And we can't do it by ourselves, and at the same time, we can't just say someone else is responsible for it. And I say that with a little bit of bitterness, having spent the morning debating with my colleagues about why we should provide low-income supports for people who struggle to pay their water bills, and previous to that, discussion around why we should offer supports to low-income folks in this city when they struggle to pay property taxes if they're homeowners. So I get frustrated about how it's always someone else's responsibility. That needs to stop. So that needs to be kind of a political narrative that we insist upon and find out where those rules are. And you're going to hold me accountable and say, Andrew, why aren't you doing anything about it? And I'll get into the whole political speech about why municipalities can't do it by themselves, but we're all responsible and in this together. And one thing the Plan to End Homelessness did identify was there is another party, and that is community organizations and the private sector generally. So there are private sector developers, for instance, that do build social and affordable housing. There are groups like Knox-Met. There are endless organizations that do incredible on-the-ground work. We heard from one already. They play an instrumental role as well. The problem is, for the last 30 or 40 years, all of that work has been downloaded on those groups' shoulders, to a point where they're in competition with each other for scarce funds. And another compounding problem is that nobody wants to talk about the real political issues because everybody's afraid of losing money. And that's a problem. And so here it comes to the municipalities and the province to take a leadership role to make sure that those groups actually speak truth to power and identify issues and point out to the municipalities and the province what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong without fear of reprisal. So that's another issue we need to talk about. Who else needs to be part of the solution? Certainly civil society and civil society organizations. but they're also in competition, and we can't rely on them to shoulder the burden by themselves and to shoulder the burden of downloading on their own. They can't do it. And the individuals working in this, I think, engage in a certain labor of love that isn't sustainable, and you see turnover and all the problems that are associated with it. We can't rest on their shoulders alone, even though they're part of the solution building. So all this was kind of in my mind when we sparked, based on a council motion, some funding to launch a working group to establish and to advance a plan to end homelessness. And I was really excited about it. Florence told me how it was going to go, and she was she was right the whole time. But I was very excited. I'm a technocrat. Problem. Plan and strategy. You finance it, you move on, right? No. Andrew was naive. So we get the working group together. Excellent collection of individuals. From, we had mayor, we had councillors, we had CBOs, we had the chief of police, all sorts of wonderful folks in the community. What really sickened me was the fact that it became a hot potato issue, and it really quickly deviated from how are we working together to some parties thinking, no, we don't want to speak too much because then we'll have to shoulder all of the work and all the cost. That part was really heartbreaking. Now, in the end, I learned a great deal. We did establish a plan, and I think it provides us with a pretty straightforward roadmap, quite literally, on how we're going to address this problem. All of the issues are identified. There's a costing. There's a very specific set of directions for all of the different groups that I've mentioned: jurisdiction, responsibility, who needs to do what, how it could be financed. For me, it was just then a simple decision on let's make it happen. But of course, politics. So technically, the plan to end homelessness, which was received and accepted as a strategy for the city of Regina to follow, we took that and we make decisions premised on that plan. We gave it to the province. And that's kind of where it has stalled at the provincial level. We don't know what they're making of it. But it at least informs us on what we need to do. And so what do we know? We know that leading up to COVID, and in fact for at least a decade, inequality was on the rise. And inequality was sustainable because it was accompanied by real wage growth, which means people can kind of be happy when the wages they're getting in their pocket exceeds the cost of living for the most part. At the same time, we know in Saskatchewan as a whole, housing by itself for the average person, whoever that is, was becoming less and less affordable, meaning more and more people were paying in excess of 30% of their income, which is a classic benchmark for housing. So across income lines, housing was becoming less and less affordable across this province for a variety of reasons. All of this just gets worse with a meth and opioid crisis that starts to skyrocket in 2014, and then the worsening slump in global commodity prices, and then COVID. So we saw all of this stuff coming. We also knew in that report, and this is where politics kind of took over, is that we have to talk about living wages, the minimum wage, and income distribution. And sadly, political wrangling forced a lot of that into footnotes, and there was a real fight to even acknowledge what produces poverty and homelessness in this city. And so again, the tension then steers towards the most acute forms of housing insecurity and homelessness, which is great. But basically the plan then focuses on the hardest to house, which is positive, but it's also the smallest number, and that doesn't really feed into a solution for how do you prevent people from falling into that circumstance. And what did we know? Well, we knew that the price tag generally was about $63 million for Regina alone. And for any of us, that's a lot of money. Well, even if you look at the city budget, provincial budget, etc., it becomes more or less a rounding error collectively. We also knew that it's not just about the money, it's how you spend it. We have, $4 or $5 billion spent on education and similar amounts on social services. It's how we spend it. And what really nailed this home for me was talking to a senior public servant who will remain nameless in the provincial government, who said, look, there's just not enough collaboration, and the fact of the matter is, we spend per capita a lot of money. In fact, we probably spend some of the highest amounts per capita in Canada. So we have first world spending, and we have third world outcomes. So it's not just the money, it's how we spend it and how we actually direct those resources. So the status quo of how we think about poverty and how we think of silos and ministries and different levels of government all operating independently of each other is a huge part of the problem. But $63 million over 5 years, that include predominantly supports from all levels of government and then capital. And that would have actually helped about 2,200 people based on those estimates. We don't have the point in time count for this year, but I suspect that the principle there will hold true. And there were 3 basic principles for this plan to succeed. And one is that everybody has access to services. Community support group talked about that. And it has to be very easy access, unconfusing access to those services. It means that if the plan is successful, that your experience with homelessness is rare and brief. And often people will look to that the Housing First success story in Medicine Hat. There's still homelessness, but the intake process and the situation in permanent and supportive housing is fairly rapid in comparison. So there will be homelessness, but zero homeless means it's very short-lived. And it doesn't mean you live in a shelter. It means you live in an apartment or permanent housing. The shelter is not a benchmark for success. You shouldn't be in a shelter. It should be a first stop before you find permanent supportive housing elsewhere. And then finally, that services are coordinated. There are tons of programs at the federal, provincial, and municipal level. It just means people have to work together. And governance was a big part of that. Instead of having all of these different community organizations fighting with each other, holding their own galas and fundraisers and competition and not wanting to talk politically, you have one organization. It receives the money, and it disperses it. And so right away, you have an end to this notion that you have to find 5 different levels of government and agencies to access the kind of resources you need either as an organization or as an individual. It simplifies the process, and it's with great irony that that model was advanced under Ralph Klein in Alberta when they did the quick math, which is, shit, it costs a lot more money to put people in prison, to have them sit around in our ERs and to constantly arrest and harass these people. It's just cheaper from an economic standpoint to actually give them a house and to keep them out of the emergency triage system. So it became a simple economic question, and from there it became provincial money that was invested at the municipal level where we were very intimately related to our residents and to the citizenry. And that's actually one of the efficiencies was we'll just give the money to the level of government and the CBOs at the ground level doing all of this work. And there was a certain level of downloading, but in such a way that it was actually a streamlined approach. It's not perfect, but that's the short version of what made the Medicine Hat Housing First model so successful. And it was a success, and it actually received a great deal of international recognition. Problems are a bit more acute here, but nonetheless. So if there's a parting word here, it's that we can do this. Knox-Met, Carmichael, the community support program and unit downtown, all of these different groups play an incredible role. And predominantly Indigenous owned and run organization, from housing corporations to service providers, need to be taking the lead, and they need to be equipped and empowered to be in a position to do so, because most of the people suffering from inequality, housing precarity, and homelessness are Indigenous or racialized in this city. So there's no better time than now to figure out what's the problem and how do we solve it, but it's political will first and foremost. And it's getting really frustrating to have to, I was talking with Cam earlier, I was like, I don't know what to say. I think I've said this stuff about 100 times already. I'm not sure what else there is to say, but political will is really where we need to go here. There's no reason for people to be camped out unless they choose to, and I don't think that someone chooses this over housing that would provide them a great deal more protection from the elements and from violence on the street. So with that dystopian note, I'll leave it there. We can do this. It's a political will. Force the levels of government to take responsibility for their role in providing a permanent response to housing insecurity and poverty in our city. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks so much. Andrew will be involved at the end as well with the other groups in talking a little bit more Final people we'd like to welcome up are Bonnie Morton and Peter Gilmer, the staff of the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry. And I just want to say, as a personal notice, they're coming up in June of 2013 when I was living in Southern Ontario, and I flipped to the back of the United Church's monthly magazine where the not help wanted ads, the classified ads for churches seeking ministry personnel. There was a big bold heading that said Regina, Saskatchewan, and right underneath it, it said downtown on purpose. And I went to the website attached to it for Knox-Met United Church, and one of the first things I found was the collaboration that this church seeks to have with decades-long activists who are standing behind me. They're celebrating their 50th anniversary of doing this work, which is both amazing to see and also disheartening to know that skilled, brilliant people have been working hard on this issue for 50 years, and yet we find ourselves where we are today. So I want to end with welcoming Bonnie and Peter to speak to us about broader issues that they're seeing.
Thanks, Cam. We've been asked to speak on the issue of poverty and homelessness in relation to present income assistance programs in Saskatchewan. And so I'm going to be focusing primarily on problems with the new Saskatchewan Income Support Program, or SIS program. However, there is a long history of inadequacy. This didn't start from nowhere, and I want to begin with a little bit of an overview of how long things have been bad before they got worse. And so one thing I can tell you is that the 1970s were the last decade where income assistance rates in Saskatchewan took cost of living indicators into effect. Between 1981 and 2005, we went almost a quarter of a century where the basic adult allowance for a person on income assistance or social assistance was never above $195 per month. $195 for food, clothing, personal and household items, and transportation. That was the basic adult allowance. With a strong push from our organization and others, between the 2005 and 2007 budgets, we did see a $60 increase in that basic allowance, which seems now very small. However, believe it or not, unbelievably, that was almost a 30% increase in the basic allowance during that 2-year period. However, at that stage, after that, we then went 14 years to this year where the basic allowance on social assistance was stuck at that rate of $255 without an increase. Now, during that period, one upside that we saw was the Saskatchewan Assured Income for Disability program, which came into effect in 2009 for people living in care, but then was moved to people living independently in 2012. And this, over the course of its first 3 years, did see a boost of, on average, $350 or more per month than the social assistance program. However, the last increase that we saw in the SED program, and this is for people with significant and enduring disabilities, the last increase that we saw was in 2015. So we've gone 6 years now without a benefit increase to the SED program. And during that same period, we've seen significant cuts to rental programs for people on the SED program, as well as a wide range of special needs. That brings us to today. And the formation of the Saskatchewan Income Support Program, which really came into place in the summer of 2019, but is now completely, as of September the 1st of this year, has completely replaced the traditional welfare programs of the Saskatchewan Assistance Plan and the Transitional Employment Allowance. Now, when it was first announced in the 2019 budget, the only thing that was announced in relation to it was that they were going to be increasing the wage exemption for people so that people on the program would be able to keep more earned income, wage income, than they had on social assistance. And because we'd been in a very clear lobbying attempt, we knew this was an area where there was a possibility for movement. So we'd been hammering away with other groups for an increased wage exemption. So when the announcement first came out, we were quite happy. We thought, okay, great. This is a program that's finally going to allow people to keep more of their earned income before it's clawed back by the ministry. And it also was in correspondence with increases to the wage exemption for the said program as well. But then when they rolled the whole program out in late June and put it into place in July, we recognized right away that there was a lot of problems that offset that wage exemption improvement. And now that it's the only backup program for people who haven't reached the criteria of having enduring and significant disabilities, though many, I can tell you, many people who are on the Saskatchewan Assistance Plan had significant disabilities. Many of them, had they applied for SAID in 2012 when it first came into place, would have gotten onto the program, but there's been stricter gatekeeping of the program in recent years, and they're not able to make it now. So what's happened with the SIS program is they have tried to, in the name of simplification, they've identified that there will be two benefits that you receive on the program. One is the old basic allowance, which is now $285 per month. And that includes all the things I mentioned: food, clothing, personal and household items, and transportation. It also, we can say, includes the $30 telephone that they used to provide on social assistance, but don't provide extra coverage for on SIS. So it covers everything that's non-shelter related. For an individual now, they only receive $575 for all shelter-related costs. And this is wrapped in all utilities. So for $575 in Regina and Saskatoon, you have to pay your rent, or if you're a homeowner, your mortgage and property taxes and home insurance, and all your utilities. But for a renter, you're dealing with rent, you're dealing with potentially Sask Power, Sask Energy, and your water bill as well, all for $575. And that's higher than the rest of the province. Outside of the two major cities, it's only $525. So that is a big problem, and it's not just individuals. Every household is way below adequate levels. And they've now shifted the household cap so that a family with 3 children receives the maximum shelter allowance of $1,150 in the major cities and $850 a month in the rest of the province. And so whether you have 3 children or 7 children in your family, you are stuck at that cap level. Now, on top of this, there's been some serious clawbacks that have taken place as well. In 2018, they got rid of the application process for the rental supplement program so that nobody new could get it, but they did at least grandfather it for grandmother for those people who already had it at that time. But now, if you come onto the SIS program with the rental supplement, that supplement is taken away from your $860. So you're losing even your rental supplement now. If you have to move and you need to get a security deposit down, the ministry will cover the shelter allowance amount of your security deposit, but then they claw that back from your future benefits at $50 a month. So, of course, when you're starting with $860 a month or $810 in the rest of the province, to have that money clawed back as well is a real hardship. There's also the issue of direct payments. In the past, and to this day was said, you can have your rent paid directly to your landlord or your utilities paid directly. With the new program, that's not an option. So you end up with the money going directly to the client. And I can tell you that the people we work with are the best budgeters that I've ever met for the majority of them, but there are people with addictions and other issues where this has become a real problem. And we know that there's many rents that didn't get paid in the month of September. So what we're calling for right now is upfront a $300 increase in the SIS allowance period to start to catch up as we move all our programs towards the poverty line. We believe that that should be the case for SED as well, an immediate $300 increase. But on top of that, we need to have the actual cost of basic utilities, power, water, energy. They have to be brought back so that that can be covered completely. We need to stop clawing back the rental supplement and the security deposit. And we need to ensure that direct payment to landlords and utilities is an option for clients. I also just want to close with one of our dream goals at the Anti-Poverty Ministry, and that is to see an actual act to end poverty in Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan and all of the provinces committed with Canada under international law to the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And that includes
poverty in Canada, like just rights for our own security. We show our ability to serve self as human beings. I bleed blood like you. We're all going to bleed again. Blood just like you. So we shall again bleed blood just like you. I love you, all of you. I love all of you. I swear. Praise the Creator, praise Jesus, praise Muhammad, praise whatever you want to. Jesus, Muhammad, Creator, we're all here. Oh.
Thank you. Thank you. Just very quickly, in terms of the Act to End Poverty, some of the rights that we've committed to under international law are the right to an adequate income, the right to a living wage, and the right to quality and affordable housing and childcare, along with pay equity for women and equity for Indigenous Canadians. And we've now gone 45 years since that covenant was signed off on without domestic remedy. It's time for an act, and we believe it needs to be a provincial act as well, because we find that so many of the levers fall under provincial jurisdiction. I agree with Andrew that all levels of government are extremely important and have to work together, as does community, but the province has so many levers, they need to be held to account, and they have committed themselves under international law, so we need to keep their feet to the fire on this. We have a saying on the door of the Anti-Poverty Ministry, and it's now up on our website, and that saying is, "The existence of poverty is shameful, to be poor is not." Poverty, as Andrew has mentioned, and I know Bonnie will as well, is never a choice. It's legislated. It's the result of public policy and economic inequality. But there's good news in that, because if we can legislate poverty, we can also legislate an end to poverty. What we need, and once again, to repeat Andrew, what we need is the public and the political will. So together, let's build that will, and let's make poverty history. Thank you.
Maybe I'll just stand up here. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, Peter has said a lot of what I was going to say, but sorry. You might know there'd be a shorty amongst the bunch, right? As I started to say, Peter has said a lot of what I was going to say. I can say it in other ways, and I probably will, as long as I've got a little bit of mic in front of me. Carol, I want to say to you first, you were saying that, there's some in our church or in our churches that say, what you say is political. That got pulled on me 34 years ago when I started working for this church and in this ministry. It was only said to me once. So I don't know what kind of attitude I used, but attitude we need, folks, right? I've never been told not to be political since. I was on social services for a number of years when I first moved to Regina as a single parent with one child with disabilities. And I remember making a commitment to go to school to get off of that system. That's when they provided more than just money. They provided other tools to assist you, right? That's not there today. We need all kinds of things, as Andrew was saying, as far as tools to make this work and be successful. I am a success. For 34 years, I've stayed off that system. And I remember the day that the supervisor came out to our school after I got students riled about them taking our bus passes away, which would have meant many of us got kicked out of school because we couldn't live up to the standards, the rules they had for us. And that supervisor said to me they were going to rule the day they ever educated me, and I've spent 34 years making that truthful. Peter has outlined what's happened with social policy over the past number of years, and especially the last 25 we've worked together. And the reality is he's talking about, so kindly put, regressive social policy. And I will put it not quite so kindly. It's shitty policy. Andrew also talked about collective responsibility. He was not talking about government members only. You and I, our organizations, we as individuals, we all have a collective responsibility to care for one another, for our brothers and our sisters. Our collective responsibility around election doesn't begin and end with a check mark on a ballot. My responsibility becomes the day they get elected into that office, and so should yours. We do not have one social program in this country that came about because any government official of the day or a political party thought it was the right thing to do. Not one social program. God love Tommy Douglas. He is not the father of health care. The people of Saskatchewan and Manitoba that didn't have it are the parents of health care that we know today. But God loved the man. He supported it and he pushed for it against people in his own party. We have to remember that once they get in there, we have to hold their feet to the fire. And it's not just conservative governments, left governments as well also do the wrong thing. Who brought in the T program? Wasn't Grant Devine and it wasn't Brad Wall. It was the Romano government. So they're all at fault for what we're experiencing today. So when they're standing on your doorstep, you require more of them as to what they're going to do for everybody, not just yourself. Because I'm going to tell you, the poverty we have today, you might be sitting behind your doors and think, I'm away from that. You're one paycheck to sitting on these doorsteps. One paycheck, usually, of sitting on these doorsteps along with others. So I'm going to challenge you, the same as we challenge government officials. No, I won't challenge you to live on what they expect people to live on. But I'm going to challenge you to pick up a phone, write a letter, and tell them everybody deserves better than that. Because the people that we see on our doorstep, and I said this morning, they elect government officials as well. They've helped elect the mayor, they've helped elect the premier, and the minister of social services, and all the people sitting down there and over there. And I don't know about you, but when I elect somebody, and whether they're the people I elect or not, my understanding is that when they get elected in, their responsibility is to serve us. And I also include that word of serve, protect. These people help to elect them. They deserve to be served and protected, as well as you or I or anybody that's got a pocket full of money. Peter went and got me a leader post because I don't get it anymore. But he brought it in, and there was a big splashy picture of us and everything else. What do you think the story was right underneath our picture? About building a baseball park. Right? And it seems we can do that. I'm not saying don't. I like sports like the rest of everybody does. But why is that our priority? Why are we not looking at doing what Andrew has suggested and making sure that everything that's vacant is filled? And you know what? They can fill them without putting them on social programs and then do the social programming stuff after, right? But we need to make sure that we're calling on government officials to do the right thing by all citizens. You don't cherry pick who you're going to serve and protect. And Andrew was also talking about how they were, they reduce, or they're not really supporting doing extra little things for low-income people right now so that they can stay in their homes and maintain them and stuff like that, or have water, right? I remember a few years ago sitting in Sask Hotel when this city let the riders have a tax break. We're not talking a couple of $1,000s that you might be behind on your taxes. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. They were forgiven everything. I don't go to a Rider game. I know you are all probably Rider fans, but that's one thing that keeps me away is the thought that they will outweigh any day than I would if I fell back into a situation where I needed some support. Like I said, when I vote, I hope that whoever gets elected is truly in there to serve, and in that word serve, also protect. And that's what we're talking about today is protecting our brothers and sisters that have fallen through our cracks, which are now great big gullies. So I'm calling on you to contact your member of parliament, your MLA, and I'm asking you to contact your city councillor and the mayor and demand that they get involved in this situation. It sits in the middle of our city. The city cannot walk away from that responsibility. Just because this church hides City Hall's view of what's going on over here doesn't mean it doesn't exist in their doorstep. They have a responsibility to step in and help just as much as you and I do. I'm challenging you to join us in this fight. We will be back here another 34 years down the road if we don't collectively come together and start yelling and screaming. So, somebody's not happy. So please come and join us in the fight to end poverty. And it shouldn't be a fight. It should be something that we all join wholeheartedly and with love in our hearts to do it. Thank you.
So I think sometimes hearing that a problem is solvable, but that it's going to be hard to solve it, is a harder thing to hear when we are generally comfortable with the way things are than to hear that it is too complicated or too hard to figure out a direct solution. I think we've heard about collective will and collective responsibility, and I think that these are two really wonderful takeaways. I guess we'd love to invite back up community support team, Andrew Stevens, and I think community support folks are going to bring some folks from the Regina Needle Recovery Community support as well with them to maybe ask each other some questions, share some final words, or if there are questions from folks who have gathered, or if we have some questions from people who have been watching online, we'll close with that. So good. So come on up, folks. And Fauna, do we have questions for? Great. And so maybe I can read the question. If you say the question, I could read it so for folks who are listening can hear it. So Larry would like Andrew to say, why can't the city control house prices and housing prices and land price within the city? Have I caught everything? Yep. Perfect.
It's a very non-legal response, but if you're talking specifically about rent controls, structurally that's a provincial responsibility in terms of who can actually do that. The prices that are controlled by the city, if at all, is through supply and demand. So by approving new housing complexes, different types of housing, that's essentially how the city controls it. To my knowledge, we don't have a legal power to actually put a cap or a control over a vacant lot. We can introduce taxation policies, however ineffective they might be. So our actual legal capacity to advance that kind of control is very limited. But I mean, that would require some acknowledgement by the province that there is a problem, maybe yield some power to the cities to take control of those issues, but we just don't have the legal power or authority to take on many of those specific policies.
So we have a question from Nairn about how involved is the United Church in how involved is the United Church of Canada in corporate ownership of residential property? Yeah, the United Church of Canada has recently started a property development corporation to ask questions around the future of church buildings, which are closing at a dramatic rate, to ensure that the use of that building when the church closes is for the public good. And I think that Nairn's question is great, and that's a good question for those of us within the United Church to ensure our structure is asking about. Yeah, we have a question here. Yeah, Carol, a deeper explanation of the statement that for people within churches to say that the church should not be political comes from a place of privilege. Thanks for your question.
Thank you for asking for clarification of that. And what I mean by privilege is that a person who already has a great many things in his or her life, if you have a lot of things in your own life, it's really hard to see that other people don't. And so to assume that we really don't have a task of being in the world partly comes from being isolated from the world by the many goods that we have. And that's what I meant by privilege. We sometimes talk about white privilege or heteronormative privilege or class privilege. That's what I meant by that. A person would be fairly isolated from conditions that many other people are involved in. To say, we have no business in politics. I hope that explains that.
Yeah, we have a question here. Joel.
I'm just wondering, a lot of this that was talked about seemed involved, and it was going to take a lot of discussions, but I'm specifically concerned about the removal of the option to have rent and utilities paid directly. I'm wondering, that seems like very focused and specific. Is there any chance that the government could be convinced to change their minds on that right away ahead of the winter? It seems like you've said already people missed payments in September, and that there's a specific group who are receiving help who are specifically at risk. Is there any chance that could be changed?
And so maybe Bonnie and Peter, if you could repeat the question into the microphone for folks who are watching at home. But yeah, thanks, Joel.
The question was because people want to repeat it, Joel, just for a second. Can we change the decision to not pay landlords directly? Is that good enough? Okay. So my comment to that one is it's an easy change, and it can be changed, but it's going to require public pressure. You'd be surprised that what they will do when public pressure gets put on them. So, like I said, I'm challenging you to join us. If you believe that that should be changed tomorrow, you contact the Minister of Social Services office. I can give you the number. And you tell them that you want that changed, and you follow it up with a letter. And I can even give you the name and the spelling of the minister. Now, when I was up here, I meant to say, and I sort of got distracted, but Peter and I had a meeting with a government official, and like Andrew, I won't say who the government official was, but this was just before COVID when we could still do face-to-face. And we were talking about raising the benefit rates, and we were told right then and there that they were not moving in that direction at all around doing any of those kinds of changes to social policy, and especially around benefit rates, right? That they firmly believe to 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 believe. Minister responsible for the health and well-being of people on social assistance. Shame. We need you to support and go after them and make them change those kinds of things that they're taking as a stand. And you would also contact the premier, and you would tell him the same thing, because he's in the caucus and can bring the message as well. So we have to make sure that that stuff gets, and that they know people aren't happy. And when you're asking about can it be changed, at the beginning, just before COVID, they cut seniors off of the SED program. Right? As soon as you turn 65. Well, the amount that most of them get would cut them off, but some circumstances would keep them on said program, like health coverage, stuff like that, that might tax the income that they're getting, and it would throw them less than what they were getting on said. So they took that away, and it didn't matter. As long as you were on OAS and CPP and all that stuff, you didn't get said. So then what happened is we spoke to some senior groups out in Indian Head and around the province. Well, they got irate. They started a letter writing campaign to the minister's office, and within 2 weeks, that changed. That's how easy it is, but we got to put the pressure on. Like I said, not one social program in this country came because our political powers thought it was the right thing to do. It was because you and I put the pressure on. Step on them, folks. Hit the gas.
Yep.
Okay, so like I know that the point of us being here is so that we all have the general consensus that we're here to try to tackle the homelessness. I just think that the lingering feeling, after having given the recognition that this isn't our land and that the church has been a proponent to a lot of the damage that has happened within legislation, that I think that it just sat a little bizarre to hear that it is a privilege for the church to be out of politics when we've seen the pattern of, like, I just think it's just not sitting right, given the fact that, like, the land acknowledgement was just given, and we're not here to put the church more in politics. So I just feel like and then the description of privilege, like, we understand like that, but then there's also a privilege to be accepted within a church.
Yeah.
And I think that the Knox is doing a good job of trying to be within the community, but there's a lot of churches still in Regina that don't follow that same system. So I guess my worry is that if we're fighting for, like, the privilege of the church to be within politics, I think that we're missing out that it's the community of the collective, and, like, collectively people have these goals to see poverty end, and I don't think that is going to be determined by the church being within politics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much for that. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that, church assuming that it should be allowed a space is something that was of the past. And church is seeking to come, as you're saying, as a servant of the collective whole, rather than expecting that our past heritage means that we have a reserved seat at the table. I think that's an outlook that has not served neither churches nor the communities that we are part of well. And I think that seeking to address many of those inconsistencies with our past and present is a really important call to the church. And thank you for lifting that up. I hope I'm catching the question right. Thank you. Yeah. I wonder if the folks at the end, community support program has invited. We'll go there and then right back to you. If the community support program's invited up the needle recovery group as well, to maybe share some of your observations, and then we'll go over to our question right here, and we won't forget that there's a question there.
Well, good day. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Shiloh. I'm part of Regina Needle Recovery and Community Support. And I'm just trying hard to hold back right now. I have our executive director with us, and I'm honored to sit up here and speak. Seems like we all know what the problem is. That's all we're doing. You laugh about it, it's the truth. At my job this morning, I had a woman come into me and put her kids into foster care because she could not afford rent. Now put that into perspective. As we're sitting here, promising the world, under-delivering, this woman had to make a decision of her life. Probably the hardest decision of her life. And it tears me apart because I work alongside these people. You heard this guy come up here and say, shut up. That's right, shut up, let's do something. It's the bitter truth. We're all sitting here preaching. No pun intended. But we're sitting here promising the world we're going to find a solution. We approached the city in July with Regina Needle Recovery. We said we need to start planning for this winter. 2 weeks ago, I got a call. Well, let's start something. Holy shit, are we behind the 8 ball here? Can you believe people sleep right here? People sleep in that park? People sleep in alleys, on mattresses. You guys get chilly, you got a blanket cover up? Great. Yeah, all over. We're too busy turning a blind eye to everything. See, you're in front of me. Now you're not. Eventually, you keep turning around. We need to face this problem right away. Sooner than later. I understand the issues with the government. And I appreciate the support, Andrew, and the direction you're giving us. Unlike other CBOs and charity groups, we don't have to worry about biting the hand that feeds us because we are self-funded. We do this out of our own pockets because it's the right thing to do. Isn't there something in the book of God here to serve fellow man? Where's our humanity? We need to give our heads a shake. Maybe this isn't what you expected to be said today, but it's what's being said. Because I represent all those people, those lost, the hungry, and the forgotten. I'm their voice. I sat 2 weeks ago at the Ledge. CBC invited me to sit with Lori Carr on Friday. I'm going to go in there with the same attitude. We're asking for tents and sleeping bags for people to survive our winter. Our cars don't even start in minus 40 weather, but we expect our people to live in parks and in parkades and churches. Come follow me on the street for a night. I work 9-hour days, spend 3-4 hours every night looking after some people with the support of many. I don't do it alone. And we appreciate everything that's given to us. But these are the harsh truth of everything. Could you imagine, for those that are parents, could you imagine having to give your kids away so they could have a life and you go live on the street? Our shelters are a capacity. That was explained. Our homeless people can't even go to the homeless shelter because of a COVID outbreak. Yesterday, a gentleman came in. He burned down his temporary home beside the homeless shelter. He had a box with a candle, knocked his candle over, burned it down. That's a sad truth for a lot of people. We all need to do better. That's correct. We need to be serving our fellow man, as it says in the Bible, looking out for our brothers and sisters, becoming one as a community in our traditional ways. Our addictions, our homelessness, our poverty does not end at 5 o'clock. It's not only Monday to Friday. While you guys go home and relax and watch your Rider games and do this and that, people are fighting for their lives. I just ask you guys to not be so close-minded. Don't be so naive. Be open-minded about it. And these are my personal opinions for the people I serve and that I work with every day. I know I have the support from the board of directors from Regina Native Recovery and Community Support. Sometimes I go over the edge, but sometimes that's what needs to be done. You know what's awesome? If you look to my left, there's a door open. Our dogs have better treatment in Regina. We have dedicated parks for our dogs to go shit. Ask some of these guys around here, where do you use the bathroom? Well, I can't go into Tim Hortons anymore because I don't have a COVID shot. I need ID to get ID. It's an ugly cycle. It was explained. Why don't we have a city-owned facility opening their doors? There's a church right here with their door open right now. Is that the solution? Do we need to be radical about this? That's what it's coming to. So I ask everybody, levels of government, the public, community groups, to come together. People's lives are lingering. These guys are coming up to us. We're not even acknowledging them. The biggest stakeholder in this discussion and debate right now is our homeless, our addicts, and the people in poverty. Where are they? They're being pushed aside, being told to sit in the back. Open your eyes, people. This is Regina. We give better treatment to our dogs and you Canadians than our people here. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We had a question over here. So question about, is there a committee or group that people can join? And maybe we'll invite each group to know if there's spaces where folks who have heard this, want to do something, can plug into. Maybe we can go along to each group, say where you know that people can plug in. And with that, we'll close and then give an opportunity for people who have heard something that they want to follow up with someone to make those connections. Yep. Sure, yeah. So maybe Andrew can close, when we have each group go, and Andrew can close with what he knows, including that committee. Thanks for your question.
As far as I know, from the community support programs perspective, I don't know of any committee right now that is formed or has been formed, but I don't see why we shouldn't or couldn't form one. We have everybody who is on the same page right here. We have the ability to make things happen. So I don't have any answers right now, but I don't see why we shouldn't form one even right as of right now.
A simple thing that we can also do is contribute to our community fridges. Really easy. Yeah, and acknowledging people when we're seeing them on the street. Those are just the easiest things we can do. That, yeah.
I'd also mention that if you're interested in terms of the specific poverty issues that we were talking about, that End Poverty Regina just had a meeting this week, but roughly it's both groups and individuals that are concerned with the issue. They get together once every 4 to 6 weeks. So November 1st at 1:30 here is the next meeting if you're interested.
Homelessness.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The fact that, you know, especially within COVID, and now that we see there's so many vacancies in the buildings, even around this exact vicinity, that are sitting vacant, that's where we can put direct action into play, right? It's, you know, the people know that it's an issue and there's a clear solution. You know, there's physical spaces for bodies to go. And it's just wild to me that we cannot make that come to fruition with all the great and determined people who are here right now. It's kind of just wild to me that we will probably even into the winter still be asking us the same questions. I hope we're not, but I'm fearful for that, because this is an all hands on deck type problem. And it is not impossible to find a solution with all these people right here, right now. And I don't want to be here again next year talking about this same goddamn issue.
I think also I really want to put pressure onto the city because of the YMCA that is sitting there vacant, that has bathrooms and has rooms with beds. I don't understand. I understand that there's like bureaucratic red tape, but this is like an emergency. Winter's coming, and we can't keep like waiting and signing papers and all these things. Like, it's not going to wait. People are dying. They're dying, sleeping on the streets and using substances to numb themselves.
So I guess just to interrupt Andrew, sorry. One thing I did forget to mention, because I was kind of worked up, is the Regina Needle Recovery and Community Support drafted up a letter to the Premier, Ministers, the Mayor, and the City Council, as well as the Saskatchewan Health Authority. It won't take too long. It's only a few hundred words, but I'm going to read it off fast. We are writing this letter of concern to formally ask for a change of services at the street level and to declare a state of emergency and public health crisis. As you are aware, Regina Needle Recovery and Community Support offers 24-hour needle recovery to assist in our drug epidemic we are facing within Regina. Along with needle recovery, we offer harm reduction supplies that we do receive through a grant from Indigenous Service Canada, also known as INAC. Also, our community support team is sitting and assisting our homeless and persons with addictions, helping with their day-to-day needs in partnership with many other organizations, just like the downtown people. We call them gray shirts. One thing we do see almost daily and have major concerns with and the lack of needle disposal bins that is offered in the city. A First Nation in East Central Saskatchewan has 2 bins in a community of 350 people. We discussed this prior with the Saskatchewan Health Authority, where they're only providing 2 bins to the folks of Regina, and that's to keep the in-person interaction and have people attend the office just on Hamilton. We need to reevaluate that system as it is just failing. The Needle Patrol Group prior to us recovered over 50,000 needles within 1 year. Our regular trips around Regina and patrolling, we are on track with that 50,000 in less than 1 year. Our main concern is the bins, that they are not effective as they are not as effective as the ones placed everywhere else in the province by Biomed. We have witnessed people reaching into the bins, and the fact that they are able to do so has made us sound the alarm. The way the bins get jammed and clogged have also raised enough concern that there is a local business that has taken its issue into their own hands. So now Regina has a third bin in a business in the downtown area. The location of the two bins should also be moved to a more visible location. It is not effective to have them hiding behind trees and power poles. We are formally calling on Saskatchewan Health Authority and the government of Saskatchewan to remove the existing bins and replace them to one that is up to the industry standard and proven not to be altered or damaged and is up to the OH&S standard. And we have photos attached in our Facebook post and to the letters that were sent out. We have also reached out as our community support team and listened to the people we serve. And that was one of the biggest concerns, along with the lack of support and services in the evenings and weekends from the Saskatchewan Health Authority. Like I said before, our addictions and homelessness does go on weekends and in the evenings. It doesn't roll up 9 to 5 like everything else in Regina. So once again, the support services that are being offered are nonprofits and local businesses to ensure that people don't fall through the cracks. Don't get us wrong, harm reduction has come a long way in Regina, but we are so far behind the times in these services. RNRCS went to Vancouver this past summer to gather information and resources to assist in the drug crisis we are facing. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, as there are many programs and operations in place already. This past month, Regina Needle Recovery Community Support partnered with many other agencies to offer one of the many pop-up COVID vaccine clinics with a huge response from the community. We also offered hepatitis and HIV testing, offered harm reduction supplies, as well as a barbecue. Many of the community members complimented us that the services were brought to them. They did not have to leave their safety of their home to get what was offered. Now that is community work. We need something being offered to the folks here in Regina, as the government plans to make mobile buses is years away. So announced a short time ago that they are coming up with these buses to help with the harm reduction outreach. We can't leave those lack of services until those buses arrive in a couple of years. Again, thanks to COVID, those buses won't be here for 2 more years. Back in July, we asked the City of Regina to sort something out. Now that we're entering October, we have been instructed to take action and just do it. We have a commitment from the city that they will not do what they did in Toronto. Many of you will be blown away as to how many homeless we have in Regina, and that slowly increases as the government of Saskatchewan has failed many with the switch to the SIS program. Many people struggled with the existing SAP program, and reducing the amount a person gets, especially during a pandemic, is a clear example how the government has let the citizens of Saskatchewan down. Unfortunately, along with this transition, we will sadly see an increase of child apprehensions, as families will now be under more pressure to provide with less support and financial resources. This is a system that's made for people to fail. Social workers are just preparing for the influx of children instead of coming up with preventative solutions. Once again, we are failing our future leaders, our children, by letting them fall into the cracks of the system. This week, we will learn more about the stats of rents not being paid and landlords filing for evictions. It's sad when we as a charity group are asking for donations of tenting supplies in a Saskatchewan winter where we get to -40. The city will not give us a city-owned facility to help with this solution, but rather send us to the legislative lawn where Tristan DeRocher's camp was set up. As everybody is too busy passing the buck, our fellow relatives will be at risk in the elements we face in Regina. We have dedicated parks for dogs in Regina, but we are turning a blind eye to the rising numbers of homelessness. So once again, with the rising numbers of overdoses, addictions, and homelessness we face, we are now formally calling on the Saskatchewan Health Authority, Government of Saskatchewan, and the City of Regina to declare a state of emergency and public health crisis to assist in this epidemic we are facing. With many of our health authorities' resources being pulled into COVID mode, we have to ensure that our most vulnerable people are being looked after. The Board of Directors and myself, Regina Needle Recovery and Community Support. Thank you.
The gentleman here in the front had a question. Yeah. Yeah. Thank.
I just want to say, out of these shallow and ladies doing the park, they do a good job for everybody sleeping outside.
Yeah.
I saw it done once. I slept in a car,
Yep.
but everybody's going to wake up. But the city's doing a good job too. I'll go help them more.
Yeah.
So I just want to say, these ladies right there, they did a good job.
Thank you. Yeah.
Charlie, Michelle too.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the question was the city's role in the plan to end homelessness. So that was just a working group. You don't want to be part of that. It's done. The plan is now housed in Namarand Housing Corporation. It's a great company, provides housing and commercial space, Indigenous owned and operated. It's kind of like the overseer of the Reaching Home program, which is like a governance model. I don't know what's happening with it. And that's part of the issue. But I can look into it. There are spaces. To be quite frank, if you want to be involved with something, Shiloh and that group is where I would start. And the reason I appreciate it, and he's probably frustrated with me in our calls, is I get a direct line to what's actually happening. So what I could use is for people to tell me specific demands, right? So we know the problem. And I'm talking specific. You need how many tents? Right now I have, okay, you want needle disposal bins. So I'll talk to Rich. I've already talked to to Saskatchewan Health Authority. They tell me their model here. They've walked me through why they don't have a whole bunch. You've heard the story. What I need help with is what is my response? So the collaboration, the simplest way is just to form a community group, and you have a direct line to me. Shiloh texts, he calls. I'm not saying that he likes how much I'm doing, but he has a direct line. So if you work with that group, you'll have a direct line to me, and then I can put specific requests forward. You also have to, don't pretend like you're talking to a normal person when you're talking to a bureaucracy or a city, and people work, but you have to frame it as like what is the city's existing commitment to homelessness, right? So you use that against us. But it has to be very specific, so we have specific ways of responding. I have notes here around, okay, you want a city building. Well, I can advocate for that. Then we'll have to talk about what kind of supports have to be in that building. So staff and bureaucrats are rightfully very risk averse, but they also plan for contingencies. So what we're hearing is just get them in that room. Well, I suspect if someone has an addictions issue, then we have to have supports, we have to have needle exchange, we have to, as we're talking about the tent city, there are a whole bunch of logistics that have to go into that. That's where I want to help. I'll help with the boring bureaucratic stuff as much as I can. The YM, that doesn't belong to the city. The city, however, is in the works to apply and hopefully receive about $7.5 million that we would then invest into a building for the purposes that we're talking about from the federal government. I can't talk about it too much because it's still ongoing, but there is a service provider who is interested. We just need the space. That would be a great place. There's a whole bunch of other considerations, but we don't own that building, so we can't open up the doors to a piece of property we don't own. But if you're talking about the field house, we need to know times. I'm happy to do that, but that's just a conversation we have to have. We've also, at the last budget meeting, I was able to get the confidence of my colleagues to put $500,000 into harm reduction. I understand that money, the adjudication process has closed. I'm hopeful that it gets into the hands of organizations like the Friendship Center that are actually doing safe consumption sites and other harm reduction initiatives. So it's a small approach, but it's kind of that bureaucratic response to these issues. And by the way, to your left is a gentleman writing vigorously who's actually in charge of a lot of this stuff at the city. So you can bug him, totally out of Dave. These are the amazing folks that are doing this, building this strategy. The idea we'd actually build an advocacy group within the city, hopefully at some point, that would give people a role to play in providing us advice on how we need to move on this. Because bureaucrats need bureaucratic language to think and to move ahead. And it benefits us to have community members like you giving us very clear direction where we need to go.
So I think we said we would be here from 4 till 5:30. I didn't bring my watch. I'm assuming we're probably within that time frame. So we want to thank Shiloh and team. Want to thank Alyssa, Ali, and team, Bonnie, Peter, and Andrew Stevens for coming. Thank you to all of you. I think we've heard a lot of good information, and I think we've also heard some like really clear calls to use that information in good ways. Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who works in areas of climate change, invites people to think of 3 circles. What you know, what moves your heart, and your sphere of influence, as in the people you can talk to. And I think we could apply that to this. We've tapped into existing knowledge and learned some things. I hope our hearts have been moved on some things, and I hope that now we can think about who we already have in our sphere of influence, and reminders from Bonnie especially and from Andrew that our sphere of influence also includes the elected officials who represent us and the organizations that we are a part of. And I hope that what we have learned, what we feel drawn to do, and where we believe we can make an influence has expanded a little bit, and that we'll go forward from there. So thanks for coming tonight, and thanks for folks who are watching. Thanks to Vonda as well for managing all of this stuff.